Developing this morning, a federal judge will allow three major defamation lawsuits to proceed against some of former President Trump's most loyal supporters. Rudy Giuliani, Sydney Powell, and MyPillow executive CEO Mike Lindell. They are all being sued for billions of dollars in damages by Dominion Voting Systems, which is the company that they falsely accused of election fraud. Let's talk about this now with CNN law enforcement correspondent Whitney and former head prosecutor from Morris County, New Jersey, and a host on the Law and Crime Network, Robert Bianchi, with us. Robert, or actually, Whitney, let me start with you here. Tell us what has happened in this. It's sort of procedural, but it's important.
Right. Okay, so and Robert can get into the meaning of the procedural moment here, but basically I'll just tick through the facts. So Dominion's bringing this lawsuit. This is just is bringing this lawsuit against Sydney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, Mike Lindell, basically saying that the damage they did spreading this misinformation about their voting machines somehow rigging the 2020 election was so damaging that they should have to cough up $1.5 billion, $1.3 billion. That is in addition to the two other lawsuits that Dominion filed earlier this week against these right-wing outlets that were also perpetuating this election fraud lie, that they were somehow in on it, that they rigged it, that their machines rigged this election for Joe Biden, which is obviously not true. They're in those lawsuits going for $1.6 billion. So $3.1 billion, I guess, between all of these five lawsuits is enormous. And right now the judge is basically saying, I think there's enough information here, enough evidence to go on. So he's tossing out this push by Rudy Giuliani, Sydney Powell, and Mike Lindell to get the case tossed. Their argument had been, well, it's free speech. Well, there's still not consensus on what happened with the election. And the judge said, no, we're moving forward.
So, Counselor, this is a Trump-appointed judge, I believe, first of all, correct? So a Trump-appointed judge opening up a world of potential hurt here for Rudy Giuliani and Sydney Powell and others. What's the most threatening aspect to them of this now? The idea that they could have to sit for depositions? Robert?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The biggest thing that we have going on here is that this was kind of a pro forma or typical motion that is filed in court. But this judge disdainfully, may I add, said that Dominion has made out a case at this point in time. They can certainly dispute it, but what's going to happen, John, is they're going to go into a discovery process, they call it, where they have to give not only sworn answers and interrogatories, but moreover, the nuclear bomb here for the three defendants is they have to give sworn depositions. And then these depositions, which are done with a court reporter under oath, where the attorneys are allowed to ask any question they want, as long as it's not privileged information. So this bleeds into all sorts of potential areas of corruption where they have to give answers to questions. And the thing that we used to love as prosecutors, I ran a prosecutorial agency, is we used to just sit back and love when there was a civil suit filed, because all sorts of information were coming through in the depositions that otherwise in the criminal world we would not be able to get, because those individuals had to exercise the right to remain silent. So this is a devastating blow, because they're not only going to get into the issues with respect to Dominion voting systems and the lies and the fraud that existed with respect to that, the nuclear bomb is they're going to be able to get into all sorts of conversations about the meetings with the president, the meetings with the staff, what was said, what wasn't said, in order to try to prove that they had no basis in fact whatsoever to make those accusations against Dominion. So from that standpoint, as a lawyer, I always ask my staff, would you rather be on the Lindell, Powell, Giuliani side, or would you rather be on the Dominion voting side? There's hands down no doubt this was a huge victory for Dominion, and I suspect prosecutors are watching very carefully about what those depositions reveal.
Yeah, it's potentially a gold mine, and the judge is saying, proceed, explore as you wish. I also want to ask you, Whitney, about B.J. Pak, who is the former U.S. attorney out of Atlanta, talking to congressional investigators. He resigned in January as you had Trump pushing the big lie and pressuring Georgia officials to, find votes. What's going on here?
Okay, so the succession of events here is really important. So B.J. Pak went in to give this congressional testimony yesterday, and it was 3.5 hours. And what he told lawmakers was that he knew he was falling out of favor with President Trump. He thought President Trump was going to fire him, so he said, you know what, I'm out of here. Let's look at the date of that. That was January 4th. January 3rd, the day before, was this apprentice-style meeting between Jeffrey Clark, Jeffrey Rosen, and Donald Trump, where Jeffrey Clark was trying to convince Donald Trump to put him as Attorney General, making the case that he could take these election fraud cases to the finish line, not Jeffrey Rosen. In that moment, cooler heads prevailed. But it was basically right after that meeting that one of the top DOJ officials called BJ Pak and said, you got to call me like right away. And so after that call, 10 hours later, BJ Pak resigned. Again, this is 2 days after President Trump had that call with the Georgia Secretary of State, trying to get him to dig up more votes, overturn the Georgia election. However, one thing I think is notable that emerged from that conversation yesterday with congressional investigators, BJ Pak did say he didn't think it was unreasonable for Trump to have concerns about the election in Georgia based on the overwhelming allegations of fraud there. However, Bobby Christine, it was the U.S. Attorney in Savannah, came in to take BJ Pak's spot. Even after January 6th, he was saying, look, there's nothing here. It doesn't exist. So, again, this is a really critical testimony. It is one of a series. We've already heard from Jeffrey Rosen. We know Senate Judiciary wants to hear from Jeffrey Clark. So this is just one more stop along this long timeline where we're going to hear a lot more about what actually happened.
The New York Times reports that Pak also said that it was investigated by federal authorities and they found no merit at all to the claims that Trump was making. So he basically quit because he wasn't going to lie. He wasn't going to vocalize the lie that Trump was insisting that he do. So, Robert, what do you make of this? What do you make of this decision by him to quit rather than lie publicly?
I don't think that people can understand as a prosecutor what is happening here to the rule of law. When I was the prosecutor, nobody would even think a politician is speaking to me to try to influence a decision I was making. And respectfully, with regard to Mr. Pak, I feel bad for his situation, but the fact of the matter is he should have stood there and towed the line. He should have waited for Trump to fire him. The fact of the matter is he indicated that there was no evidence of widespread fraud. He was being asked to find corruption. He said he couldn't find any. And when he got a whisper in his ear that Trump may fire him, which he should have waited to happen in order to build a better case, he resigned. He didn't release this information to anybody. And when you add this data point to all the other data points, find corruption, just get me another whatever 1,000 amount of votes in order for me to get over Georgia. It shows a pattern of practice that prosecutors will put together to say this was not an innocent thing where the president or his people actually thought that there was real fraud. This was a strong-arm tactic. And you know what really bothers me about this, to be honest with you, is every day, day in and day out, we deal with clients that have minor infractions of federal law, and the full weight of the government comes down on them like a ton of bricks. But here we have something that went to the foundation of our constitutional democracy, and it seems like we're playing tiddlywinks with regard to whether or not we're going to really investigate it from the standpoint of something that could have affected the outcome of our democracy, put us in a constitutional crisis. Personally, if it were me, I would have stayed into the position and I would have waited to be fired so that I could show that yet there's another piece of evidence that there's undue influence. There's lots of federal laws, lots of state laws that prohibit this kind of conduct, and politicians have gone down for a far less than this. We'll wait to see whether or not there's the intestinal fortitude to bring this forward and do what happens to all sorts of other American citizens right now, today, every day, in every court around the country. Will this be the exception to the rule in this most profound circumstance? Let's hope not.
Robert, thank you so much for your insight here. Whitney, thank you so much for your reporting. The Taliban is gaining ground